Welcome to Prime Suspects alongside Adam Bjorn, and joining us today from the National Sporting Library and Museum in Middleburg, Virginia, Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr. I'm your host, Matt Landis. Adam, you know the drill. Let's kick off by having you give us the inside scoop on college football Week 11 and NFL Week 10 results for the books, as well as your Circa Survivor entries after Carolina goes down as the most picked team of the week and Buffalo loses as a favorite of more than a touchdown and as the fourth most popular Week 10 selection.
Saturday was rough. When I got the numbers Sunday morning, college Saturday was a rough day, especially in the live. I didn't pin down exactly which games it were, but the live betting on Saturday was rough, particularly in New Jersey, which makes me think that the Arbors had a day out and caught us there. But, you know, it's part and parcel of the game. Our typical bridge jumpers had a good week, so that's generally our result in Ohio. But Sunday morning was good. So good results, a few upsets there. Particularly Miami was a good result. New Orleans was a good result and Atlanta covering the 6.5 was a decent one. But the afternoon games, favorites and overs, I doubt there's a sports book on the planet that won Sunday afternoon. And then Sunday night was a great result. The money coming in on Pittsburgh, which actually deterred me from my third pick Survivor, put me on a wrong side at one point. It was phenomenal. The amount of money that was spoke of it last week, Monday I think it was, it flowed all week. So it was a good result in the end to close out the day. Sunday and all was good week. But NBA was actually one of the low points or pain points for the week. The live betting in particular, we didn't have a great week there. But all in all, we got out of it with yesterday morning sort of being the saving grace for the week. On the Survivor front, I got two through. I had Seattle. I had Detroit. So, you know, a couple of painless results there. But I did end up on Carolina. I went back and forth. I was looking at Chicago. So when they were down, I thought, okay, not so bad. And I was actually looking at the Chargers as my third pick, but that money, and then I did some research with the O-lineman out. You know, they're 5-0 with him, 1-3 without him. And there was all these concerns and whatnot. So I thought, you know what? If I pick Carolina, there's a whole lot of people coming down with me, or, you know, I'll get another one through and the third one through. So, yep, took 489 other entries down with me on Carolina. I think now there's a flat 1,000. I had 0.16% chance last week with my three runners. Now I'm 0.2% chance. So I guess I'm moving forward. But I've got two alive, 1,000 left. So, you know, we're 10 picks, 8 weeks. Let's see how it rolls.
Well, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was Meatloaf who famously said 2 out of 3 ain't bad, especially in a week like this.
Yes, he did.
Getting 2 entries through has you sitting relatively pretty. Got to ask one quick follow-up as far as Survivor goes. It seems like each week with your remaining entries, you're diversifying by picking multiple teams. How does your thought process dictate picking multiple teams each week versus the option to possibly go all in with one team?
So it's real availability. I had no Broncos, so I wasn't involved Thursday night. Was hoping that the Raiders would do the job there the way they were playing early on and the chance to tie it up at the end. Seattle, I only had one. I would have went with 2 of them out of 3 I'm not putting all the eggs in one basket. And Detroit was kind of future value, whatnot, but I just felt like I needed to guarantee something through. I felt like they were the team of the week that should get through. Glad I dodged the Bills, but I didn't have them available and a few others as well. So at one point there, it looked like there was going to be a nice chunk taken out. I mean, Colts down, Bears down. So, yeah, I mean, I'm diversifying. It's probably not the smartest thing when you have sort of more than a couple, but now it's really getting to Thanksgiving, which I guess we're 2 weeks away from, making sure I have those. But this week's tough. I mean, looking at the spreads, Patriots maybe, and again, Thursday night, which I'm trying to avoid those ones. Thanksgiving Day looks tougher now. Christmas Day looks tougher. Maybe the Ravens over Cincinnati, one of those. But you're going to need to sort of hang your hat out there and try and sneak through the next few weeks because it's going to be a tough run.
And stepping back for a moment to see the forest from the trees, if you will, we've now officially passed the halfway mark of football season. So, Adam, how would you say it's tracking at Prime Sports and Bet, Chris, relative to your expectations at the outset?
I think it's on track, if not surpassed it. Volume's been good. Sign-ups each week's good. First deposit's good. I mean, Kentucky was actually a great weekend. Had a really good result this week and yesterday. I think the best week we've had there. Arizona's chipping away. Again, we're getting a lot of smaller players, which has been interesting to sort of see that versus, we've sort of fighting against one in Ohio, and then we've got all the arbitrages in New Jersey. But I think it's on track, and I've felt like the last 2 or 3 months, as difficult as this is, as hard as it is, and, things will roll out in the next few days, that it is really hard, and there's some things we're up against right now. But I'm optimistic. I actually think there's, life in it. Just shows ESPN Bet pen deal, how hard it is going back to that. I know we'll get into that in a short time, but it's hard out there. And I think we're doing a decent job holding our own and getting ready to sort of make a few changes, big changes that hopefully kick us into the future.
More to come indeed on ESPN Bet. We'll get there shortly. But Joe, first up, it is time for this week's edition of Old Wine and a New Bottle. On the heels of recent scandals in the NBA and the UFC, Major League Baseball is now making headlines for the wrong reasons. Cleveland relief pitchers Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz have been indicted for pitch rigging. What's your take on this latest story to take the news cycle by storm?
Well, one, it's this story about Clase and Ortiz. This is really from several months ago when they were first rounded up and being investigated. They're suspended. Now with the indictments, obviously the timing coming on the heels of everything going on with the NBA and UFC and everything, you could say like, okay, yeah, there's a bit of piling on you're going to have here in the near term. Again, more people in the media elsewhere saying like, oh, legalizing sports betting in the United States has been a net negative. It is so obviously the opposite of this. I'm encouraged by what I hear. One, the Justice Department, the FBI now have dedicated resources for sports betting, whereas before they didn't. So it's great to see them working in concert with regulators and the regulated industry, to sniff this stuff out. And, also that none of this stuff would have been caught were it not for sports books coming forward in the regulated market, working with people like IC360 to be able to pass this information on. What I'm hopeful for is with all the coverage of this, and when you look at just how minute the infractions were, I mean, we're talking about pitch by pitch. We're not talking about them throwing games or shaving points or anything like that. We're talking about spot fixing individual pitches. And I really love the one, I can't remember which one, who's like trying to throw a ball way outside. The guy swung at it, made it a strike and lost that bet. Boy, they can't even spot fix correctly. But what I'm really hoping is when you look at this, is that it is absolutely striking fear into the hearts of players in the leagues to say like, look, you can't take a pitch off, you can't take a quarter off, you can't take a play off, and we won't see it and we won't catch it. And, what I'm really hoping is that, yeah, obviously this is an ugly period and the timing of it is just continues to add to the media frenzy about it, but this is the system working. And the more that there are serious consequences from this, not just the league suspending people or investigating people, but there's indictments and, every pitch, every shot, everything is being watched. This is good news for us in the long run. I did think it was interesting in concert with this, you had the writer from the New Yorker, I believe it was Mr. Yang. I can't remember his first name on this. What was interesting about that is you see this kind of like change in attitudes as people are starting to get a little deeper into it. He wrote a column a year ago in the New Yorker on the heels of the Jonte Porter stuff saying like, obviously, regulated sports betting has been terrible for sports, been terrible for the game. And he actually, in the wake of the NBA indictments and everything, actually reconsidered it. And you really got to hand it to somebody in the media changing up like this and saying like, actually, and I encourage everybody to look for this article. We'll try and put the link up for it in the show notes, if only so that the author can get full credit for this, because I'm mangling his name and everything like that. But paraphrase Andrew Yang. But, paraphrasing, it's like, no, when you got into it, he's saying like, no, actually, when you look at this, all of these things that are happening right now are the result of regulation, that people are being caught because of regulation. So it's interesting to see somebody like that, who is really a thought leader in the opposite direction, to tack back in the other direction. So I find it all encouraging.
And I recall hearing both of you guys say over the course of these scandals that have stacked up recently that sportsbooks can be the real victims in these scenarios. So if we want to look for a silver lining and close the loop on a topic Adam alluded to earlier, at least ESPN won't bear the brunt of any future similar situations here.
That's a segue. Oh my God.
ESPN Bet's partnership with Penn Entertainment reaching an unceremonious ending. Adam, let's go ahead and get your postmortem here. How much of a chance do you think it ever stood? And how, if at all, does it affect your expectations for other brands to potentially exit the market in the foreseeable future?
Well, for me, I don't know how they don't succeed with such a big brand. Yes, it's an old brand. Yes, it's, been around, but you have a database to die for. I mean, it's the same thing though with Fubo, Twin Spires, some of these things. I really think it comes down to management and the way that they're operating, whatever they're operating. But, you got to look at Penn, did the Barstool thing, failure, the platform, the score, ESPN, like they might be the biggest loser out of this industry so far with the amount they've spent and the little that they've gained from this whole thing. It's insane, the multiple billion-dollar spends to be where they're at now, and how they think that going back to the score brand's going to be any, advantageous thing versus ESPN. Yes, it's not going to cost them how much ever it's going to cost them with the ESPN deal, but, I really don't see how these places fail as much as they do with the tools that they have. Maybe I'm missing things. I'm not seeing things behind the scenes. Maybe it's the risk adverseness to the whole thing. Maybe it's the marketing. Maybe it's the way they're tackling these players, customer service. I don't know. But it feels like, give the keys to a bus like that, be able to drive it into a good position. And it just really blows my mind. It's not surprising. They've been talking about this for a while. I thought it was going to happen sometime next year. They pulled the trigger early. ESPN quickly jumping into bed with somebody else. But I mean, I've played with the Penn stock on and off the last sort of year or two, watching it go down, watching it go up, and riding it on both sides. Kind of speechless as to how you blow this thing up and don't have some kind of more success than what it was.
And Joe, building on that a bit, I'll throw a two-parter your way. First off, do you think the end of ESPN Bet will mark the end of any future media and betting integrations in the US market, at least of this scale? And second, looking at Penn now, do you think they can find any more success with the Score brand than they did with ESPN Bet and Barstool?
Well, I don't think you're going to see any media brands try and become a sports book a la ESPN Bet, or let's remember Fox Bet. ESPN Bet wasn't the only big sports brand to fumble this one and really cock it up. Everything. I mean, it's amazing how much this is a sports metaphor. You got the best talent, best everything in the world. It all comes down to execution and management/coaching. They did a terrible job of it. There's no shortcuts to success. Doesn't matter if you got a great sports brand, right? You have to be able to execute, and they've done a very, very poor job. And it's because they were looking for a shortcut to success, and there just simply are no shortcuts to success. As far as will you see any big media integrations? Well, maybe insofar as that, the commitment that ESPN immediately threw into DraftKings. Talk about it being like a Taylor Swift song. It's like the leader of the high school marching band gets broken up with and dumped in favor of the starting quarterback, or Penn gets thrown aside for DraftKings by ESPN. But, that big commitment there. And then you also look at DraftKings a few weeks ago. They made that big commitment to NBC Sports, which mirrored the commitment that, remember, PointsBet made when the market first opened up. And PointsBet just never got out from under that one. It was never really well done. And it seems to be very similar to what's on offer here now with ESPN. Everybody's looking for the shortcut. I think it's an awful lot of money that's being burned for probably relatively little return, because how much of a difference is it going to make, say, the integration of DraftKings odds into the ESPN experience, when as soon as they roll ads, you're going to see, FanDuel, BetMGM, and all the others. So are people really being influenced by that right now? None of the research suggests that anything moves young bettors. This is the advertising, this kind of integration. It's not really moving the bettor who's 21 to 35, which is the target market for those guys. But what's a few billion of somebody else's money to throw at something? So I guess they'll just keep trying. As far as Penn's concerned, I hope they finally come back down to earth and realize what they are. And they're a regional gambling company. They're one of the largest in the United States, but they got to stop thinking that they're going to run with FanDuel and DraftKings. As far as now they're going to use the brand to score, that brand means nothing. It means nothing to anybody here in the United States. Maybe it's big in Canada, but there's a lot of things that are big in Canada that just don't translate to the United States. Penn ought to really get back to basics here. And I think that's the problem they've had ever since Tim Wilmot left as CEO at Penn National Gaming. and they seem like they've become more cosmopolitan from their why I'm missing Pennsylvania origins. They really got to get back to basics. They have things like Caesars, like BetMGM have, in that they have tangible assets that they can use and offer and have an integrated offering. How do they integrate their sports product online, digital, with their brick and mortar product? Because they have all those things. Same thing with BetMGM and the same thing with Caesars. They have assets that FanDuel and DraftKings don't, that could be better utilized to be like, fully integrated digital real world experiences. And I think everybody's got to stop thinking unidirectionally, and they got to start thinking about, like, what's the lane that we should be in? Adam's constantly talking about being in your lane and knowing thyself. And I think that's where Penn ought to be here right now, instead of thinking like, okay, what's our next shortcut? Is it Tinder bet, or something like that? Match.com bet? Like, where can we find a big group of sports adjacent people aggregated so that we can go out and try another shortcut to success?
All right. Well, from ESPN Bet fading away to the worldwide leader's new betting partner forging ahead, a DraftKings prediction market is coming. Adam, DraftKings says it'll be launching sports events contracts via DraftKings Predict in the coming months, competing directly with Kalshi, Polymarket, Robinhood, and others. DraftKings is obviously a competitive company, but how do you think they can compete with these other prediction markets that all have a head start? And how would you approach this if you were CEO Jason Robbins?
It's another vertical to what they're building out. They've also said that they're going to target the states that they're not licensed in. Obviously, all the state regulators are coming out saying, anybody getting into prediction markets, blah, 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 blah. There is not a state in this, yes, I am actually in this country. There's not a state in this country that will pass up those tax dollars that they're currently getting from DraftKings or FanDuel. So give them a chance. Let them go build this thing in those states that aren't licensed yet. Maybe it'll kick those states, in the butt a bit about pushing into getting their sports betting and that sort of fast-tracked whatnot. They're building, like they did with the fantasy stuff, building databases. When it comes to the prediction market wars, I mean, I got to laugh. This was 20 years ago when there was BetDAC and Matchbook and Betfair, and they had the whole world to fight with. This is 50 states, 300 million minus, adults. So what are you playing around with? 130 million when Betfair, BetDAC, and all that had, 3 or 4 billion on the planet to go after. All they're doing is trying to cover some of their turf. I don't think they definitely should do it. Yes, move forward, try and compete in that space. They have the expertise, business expertise, marketing expertise per se, but really they're just sort of protecting some of their turf and their market share. It's something that they definitely should do. Now, when it comes to actually competing, as much as being talked about on these things, you're really looking at the non-sport stuff as well. I think on the New York mayor election, they did 100 million. On a Monday night football game, they do 30 to 40 million. So this is also going beyond the state's sports catalogs of what else you can offer. I saw they're betting on the top temperature of the day in different cities and things like that. It's just really another piece of the landscape that they're building out, another vertical. It's the right way they should do it. They went through were they Railbird DraftKings some month ago or some weeks ago? They're just trying to continue forward, look at those states that they're not in legally with the sports betting or the casino. And I think it's something that they should have done.
Well, Joe, as Adam clarified, DraftKings says they'll launch sports prediction markets only in states where they're not offering a licensed sportsbook, despite some states warning operators not to engage in prediction markets products in any state. Robbins has said he's optimistic they'll have a good resolution and says they'll be fine. All that said, what expectations do you have for regulators to follow through on warning letters to penalize DraftKings, as opposed to those warnings going down as what Adam would call nothing burgers?
So most of the regulators out there, they have zero experience in this type of situation. So they're muscling up and sending out these ultimatums is something that they don't have any experience in. However, New Jersey does. New Jersey's top performing casino for 125 years is the Borgata, which was a joint effort between MGM and Boyd. And MGM got into a overseas tie-up in China with an individual that the New Jersey regulators considered an unsuitable person. So the New Jersey regulators told MGM, look, you either divest yourself of your opportunity with that person or you're out of the Borgata. And MGM was out of the Borgata because they were more interested in Macau than they were in Atlantic City. So it will be interesting to see how most of the regulators try and dread this thing from a public relations standpoint. Because I think Adam's right. It's really tough for them to just suddenly say to, 40% of their in-state sports betting tax collection, you're out. I mean, maybe they'll figure like, well, if FanDuel doesn't get the customers, Fanatics and BetMGM and whomever else will, and we'll be back to wherever, and we'll have shot a hostage in order to prove that we're serious. But I think it's not likely that they would do that. It's very disruptive. But I do wonder if a state like New Jersey that does have a history of shooting hostages might follow through with it and see how that affects the industry.
Plenty to follow on that front in the weeks and months to come. Adam, for the purposes of this episode, we will go ahead and bring it full circle with our weekly football look ahead. Give us an overview of any noteworthy early movement you've seen so far when it comes to openers for Week 12 in college football and Week 11 in the NFL.
In the NFL, Patriots is where most of the action's going this week. They were open 9.5. They're currently 11.5. Chiefs are another one that's been getting money. They opened at 3. They're now 4. And both these are on the master side as well, getting plenty of action. But it's pretty light otherwise, which surprised me considering what the weekend was and how they come in firing last week. But yes, those are the two main games that they've come at. I think in the college, looking at the big volume games, Georgia, Texas is seeing early volume, particularly on the Georgia side from the Masters. We're looking at about 70% of the money on them, 100% of the master money. Air Force, my tip last Saturday during the live stream, early money coming in on them. They were plus 7.5 and 8, and that's currently a solid 7. And then the other big game is Notre Dame, Pittsburgh. That's getting good two-way action, but generally the master money again from 9 up to 11 on them as well. And then the last one is good old Mississippi against Florida is probably the biggest bet college side so far this week.
All right, well, we will go ahead and sign off on that note with Joe providing a fitting backdrop from the National Sporting Library and Museum. To the audience, thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.